CNN has learned that the Justice Department is now seeking former Vice President Mike Pence's testimony in its criminal investigation into former President Trump's attempts to stay in power after losing the 2020 election. Pence's team has indicated he is open to discussing a possible agreement with the DOJ to provide at least some testimony. Joining me now, CNN senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed. Of course, Paula, he refused to give testimony to the January 6th Select Committee. Appears a different approach to the Department of Justice. What do we know?
Well, you have to have a different approach here, Jim, because, of course, it's a different entity. A request from the Justice Department is very different than a request from the January 6th committee. And look, Pence is so unique in his ability to provide insight and evidence about what was happening with the former president and his allies around the election and around the insurrection. And recently, the former vice president, he's become very public about what he saw, what he observed, and how he felt about it as he promotes his new memoir. And publicly over the past couple of weeks, he's talked about how he believed that a tweet from the former president attacking him was, quote, reckless. He's very critical of how the former president handled the insurrection. And it was expected, once he was that public with all of those comments, Jim, it was fully expected that prosecutors would have some follow-up questions for him. Now, as you noted, he did rebuff a similar request from the January 6th committee, but some of his aides have spoken not only with lawmakers, but also with the Justice Department. So if he would like to cooperate, really the only thing that could potentially get in the way here is if the former president wanted to try to assert privilege. That is something he's done with other witnesses, though he has been largely unsuccessful. It has succeeded in delaying. And when it comes to these two investigations that the newly appointed special counsel is overseeing, one of the key things here is that they really want to try to move these along as quickly as possible.
A deliberate strategy, it seems, for Trump's team. Paula Reed, thanks so much. All right, let's dig in a little deeper with Paul Callan. He's a former New York City prosecutor. Paul, happy Thanksgiving to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Jim.
So what's the likelihood he testifies here? I mean, as Paula notes, it's different. A subpoena from the Justice Department is different from a subpoena from the January 6th committee. So do you believe he does eventually give some sort of testimony?
Yes, I think at the very least, he's going to cooperate with the Department of Justice and give them sort of an informal in-house interview. And I think he's going to wind up in front of a grand jury as well. There's a very big difference between testifying and cooperating with the DOJ as opposed to a congressional committee. Remember, Pence has said there were profound separation of powers problems that were presented initially because the legislative branch was seeking testimony from the executive branch. But the DOJ is part of the executive branch. So that argument doesn't exist anymore. And because he's openly accused Trump of having recklessly endangered not only him, but his wife and daughter who were present on Capitol Hill that day, I think he's waived the executive privilege argument as well. So I don't know how he could protect himself against a legitimately issued subpoena to testify in the criminal case.
Okay, so you don't believe he can protect himself, but as Paula notes, it's possible the president's legal team can assert some sort of privilege claim here. Likely to win on that argument?
I think they're likely not to win because publication of his book has really, let the horse out of the wherever it's confined in Washington.
Out of the barn. Exactly.
The barn. Yeah, I guess there are barns in Washington. But in any event, it's waived, I think. And also, Trump lawyers should have asserted that earlier against the vice president with respect to publication of the book. They did not. So I think there's a very good argument here that they've waived their right now to assert executive privilege on that issue.
It's such a great point because so many books have been written by folks who refuse to testify before various committees here. Now Pence's team has said they'd be willing to testify on some issues. Is Pence's team setting some guardrails around the subjects they will talk about and will not talk about?
Yes, I think they are. And obviously, the DOJ will want his cooperation, and I'm sure they'll be willing to sit down at least initially with respect to those limitations. But the real question is, if they really need his testimony to indict Trump, when you think about it, Pence is one of the biggest victims of Trump's actions on January 6th. His family was endangered. He personally was endangered because the crowd was calling to hang Trump. Hang Pence and interfere with the certification of the presidential election. So he's a very important witness, I think, in any criminal case that could be brought against Trump.
All right, as an experienced prosecutor, what is your gut as to how far along the DOJ investigation is, given that they are now seeking the testimony of Mike Pence? Does that give you an indicator that they're in the final stages?
I think they are in the final stages. And of course, out of left field, we had a special prosecutor appointed by AG Garland. But I think this special prosecutor is going to come in and really accept the investigation which has occurred to date. And I have no doubt it's been a very thorough and almost complete investigation. So I think, unlike the Mueller investigation, which of course went on for years, I think we're going to see this thing wrap relatively quickly in terms of them making a determination about whether to indict a former president or not.